All right. The classic fairy tales by Iona and Peter Opie. The next story is The Master Cat, or Puss in Boots, as it's more commonly known. A little background. The story of Puss in Boots, as told by Perrault, Le Chat Botté, published in Histoire au Conte du Temps Passé, 1697, is the most renowned tale in all folklore of the animal as helper. The tale is unusual in that the hero little deserves his good fortune, that is, if his poverty, his being a third child, and his unquestioning acceptance of the cat's sinful instructions are not nowadays looked upon as virtues. The morality of the story has in fact troubled many editors in the past. George Cruikshank amongst them, who took exception to a system of imposture being rewarded by the greatest worldly advantages. Certainly the Master Cat can be acclaimed the prince of con men, few swindlers having been so successful before or since. The cat was not, however, Perrault's creation. In Basile's Pentamerone, Day 2, Tale 4, 1634, is the tale of an old beggar in Naples who died so poor that his elder son was left nothing but a sieve, the younger son merely a cat. The younger son bellyached about his miserable inheritance, but the cat told him he did not know his good fortune. "I can make you rich if I put my mind to it." Thereafter, every morning in Basile's tale, the cat went off to catch fish, which it carried to the king, announcing, "My Lord Gagliuso, your Majesty's most humble slave, craves your indulgence, and with all due respects sends you this fish." At another time the cat went where the fowlers were at work, and gathered up the tasty small birds they had caught. These it took to the king with the same obsequious message. Eventually, of course, the king wished to thank Lord Gagliuso in person. On the morning of the appointment, the cat arrived at the palace in a state of distress. He offered Lord Gagliuso's apologies, explaining that his lordship's servants had made off during the night with his personal possessions, leaving him without even a shirt to his back. Hearing this, the king sent clothes from his own wardrobe, and the beggar's son, dressed in the king's garments, was cordially received and banqueted. After the entertainment, the cat remained behind and suggested to the king that as his master was a man whose wealth had no equal, an alliance might be to their advantage. The king then agreed to send trusted servants to report on the extent of Lord Gagliuso's estates. But when they set out, the cat, on a pretext, went ahead. Wherever the cat met a flock of sheep, a herd of cows, a drove of pigs, or a troop of horses, it warned those who were looking after them to beware of brigands who were pillaging the countryside. If they wished to be unharmed, advised the cat, they should say everything belonged to Lord Gagliuso. At length, the king's servants became weary asking the same question and receiving the same answer. Everything that could be seen, it appeared, every animal, every field, and every farm, belonged to Lord Gagliuso. They returned with a wondrous tale of his lordship's riches, and the king promised to reward the cat if a marriage could be arranged between his daughter and Gagliuso. The cat, as can be imagined, had little difficulty in persuading the beggar boy to agree to marry the king's daughter, and negotiated in addition a large dowry, which Gagliuso used, on the cat's advice, to buy a fine estate. But the tale does not end here, as it does in Perrault's story. Gagliuso, in his gratitude to the cat, promised that when it died, he would have its body preserved in a gold coffin. 3 days later, to try him, the cat pretended to be dead, and it suffered the humiliation of hearing Gagliuso tell his wife to take the corpse by the paws and chuck it out the window. The cat was furious. It jumped to its feet, demanding whether this was to be its reward for exerting itself on the beggar boy's behalf, and it rushed out of the building, never to be seen again, leaving Gagliuso to look after himself in future. The resemblance of this tale to Perrault's could scarcely be closer, it might seem, other than that the cat was bootless and the estate was purchased, but there is no evidence that Perrault knew the Pentamerone, which had not as yet been translated into French. However, the story of a trickster cat had already appeared in Italy at a much earlier date. Straparola's popular Piacevoli Noti, Night 2, Fable 1, 1553, and an edition of Straparola had been published in France in 1560. In some respects, Straparola's story is even closer to Perrault's tale than Basile's. Thus, a poor woman in Bohemia is said to have had 3 sons, and to have died, leaving them nothing but a kneading trough for the eldest, a pastry board for the second, and a cat for the youngest son, a youth named Constantino Fortunato. Constantino, like Gaglioso, was unimpressed by his inheritance until one day the cat, who we are informed was a fairy in disguise, announced it would provide for Constantino's well-being. It caught a leveret, took it to the palace, and presented it to the king with a now familiar feline servility, telling the king that the young hare was the gift of its master, Constantino. This performance the cat repeated a number of times, always managing to purloin something eatable at the palace to bring back to Constantino, until it considered the time was ripe to put the stratagem into practice, which now, 400 years later, is notorious. It told Constantino to strip and throw himself into the river that ran close to the palace. Thereupon the cat set up a cry of, "Help, help! Run, run! Master Constantino is drowning!" The trick, of course, succeeded brilliantly. The king himself heard the cry and sent members of his household to the rescue. And when the cat explained how his master had been on the way to the king with a rich gift of jewels, and had been attacked by robbers who had stolen the jewels and attempted to murder him, the king felt yet more warmly towards the young man, and determined he should have his daughter Elisetta for a wife. When the nuptials were over, and the king had presented Constantino with 10 mule loads of gold and 5 mule loads of rich raiment, clothing is much featured in fairy tales, the bride and groom were sent off with a great troop of retainers to Constantino's home. Constantino, needless to say, was perplexed where to go, but the cat told him not to trouble himself and rode on ahead of the cavalcade. Wherever the cat met travelers on the road or shepherds with their sheep, it warned them in terrifying terms of the great body of armed men who were approaching. He said if they were asked whose men they were and wished to be safe, they should answer boldly that they were Constantino's men. Thus, as the cavalcade advanced and the king's men inquired of herdsmen the name of their lord, they imagined they were entering Constantino's domains, since every herdsman replied he was Constantino's servant. In the meantime, the cat had come to a stately castle, which, the owner being absent, was guarded by but a few men. The cat easily frightened these guards into submission, and the cavalcade, being informed the castle was Constantino's, made themselves welcome. Furthermore, this is the weakest part of Straparola's tale, a fatal accident is said to have befallen the lord of the castle while he was away, so that, conveniently, Constantino was able to remain at the castle. And when the king of Bohemia died, the people chose Constantino to be their king in his place. The translation of Perrault's story, which follows, was made by Robert Samber and is given as published in Histories or Tales of Past Times, 1729. One moment. Okay, here we go. The Master Cat, or Puss in Boots. There was once upon a time a miller who left no more estate to the 3 children that he had, who were all boys, but his mill, his ass, and his cat. The partition was soon made. Neither the scrivener nor the attorney were sent for. They would soon have eaten up all the poor patrimony. The eldest had the mill, the second the ass, and the youngest nothing but the cat. The poor fellow was quite comfortless at having so poor a lot. "My brothers," said he, "may get their living very handsomely by joining their stocks together, but for my part, when I have eaten up my cat, and made me a muff of his skin, I must die with hunger." The cat, who heard all this, but made as if he did not, said to him with a grave and serious air, "Do not thus afflict yourself, my good master. You have nothing else to do but give me a bag, and get a pair of boots made for me, that I may scamper through the dirt and the brambles, and you shall see that you have not so bad a portion of me as you imagine." Though the cat's master did not build very much upon what he said, he had often, however, seen him play a great many cunning tricks to catch rats and mice, as when he used to hang by his feet, or hide himself in the meal, and make as if he were dead, so that he did not altogether despair of his affording him some help in his miserable condition. When the cat had what he had asked for, he booted himself very gallantly, and putting his bag about his neck, he held the 2 strings of it in his 2 forepaws, and went into a warren where there was a great number of rabbits. He put bran and sow thistle into his bag, and stretching himself out at length, as if he had been dead, he waited for some young rabbits, not yet acquainted with the deceits of the world, to come and rummage his bag for what he had put into it. Scarce was he laid down, but when he had what he wanted, a silly rash young rabbit jumped into his bag, and Mr. Puss, drawing immediately the strings, took him and killed him without mercy. Proud of his prey, he went with it to the palace, and asked to speak with the king. He was shooed up the stairs into his majesty's apartment, and said to him, "I have brought you, sir, a rabbit of the warren which my master, my lord Marquis of Carabas," for that was the title he was pleased to give his master, "has commanded me to make your honour a present from him." "Tell thy master," said the king, "that I thank him, and he does me a great deal of pleasure." Another time he went and hid himself amongst the corn, holding still his bag open, and when he saw a brace of partridges run into it, he drew the strings and took them. He went and made a present of these to the king, as he had done before of the rabbit. The king in like manner received the partridges with a great deal of pleasure, and ordered him some money to drink. The cat continued after this manner for 2 or 3 months, to carry from time to time game of his master's taking to the king. One day above the rest, when he knew for certain that he was to take the air along the riverside with his daughter, the most beautiful princess in the world, he said to his master, "If you will follow my advice, your fortune is made. You have nothing else to do but go and wash yourself in the river. Then that part I shall shew you, and leave the rest to me." The Marquis of Carabas did what the cat advised him to, without knowing why or wherefore. While he was washing, the king passed by, and the cat began to cry out as loud as he could, "Help! Help! My lord Marquis of Carabas is going to be drowned!" At this noise the king put his head out the window of his coach, and finding it was the cat who had brought him so often much good fortune, he commanded his guards to run immediately to the assistance of the Marquis of Carabas. While they were drawing the poor Marquis out of the water, the cat came up to the coach and told the king that while his master was washing, there came by some robbers, who went off with his clothes, though he had cried out "thieves" several times as loud as he could. This cunning rogue of a cat had hidden them under a great stone. The king immediately commanded the officers of his wardrobe to go and fetch one of his best suits of clothes for the Lord Marquis of Carabas. The king caressed him after a very extraordinary manner, and as the fine clothes he had given him set off his good mien, for he was well made, and very handsome in his person, the king's daughter took a secret inclination to him, and the Marquis of Carabas had no sooner cast 2 or 3 respectful and somewhat tender glances, but she fell in love with him to distraction. The king made him to come into the coach, and take part of the airing. The cat, quite ravished to see his design succeed, marched on before, and meeting with some countrymen who were mowing a meadow, he said to them, "Good people, you that mow, if you do not tell the king that the meadow you now mow belongs to my lord Marquis of Carabas, you shall be chopped as small as herbs for the pot." The king did not fail asking of the mowers whom the meadow they were mowing belonged to. "My lord Marquis of Carabas," they said all together, for the cat's threats had made them terribly afraid. You see, sir," said the Marquis, "this is a meadow which never fails to yield a plentiful harvest every year." The master cat, who went still on before, met with some reapers, and said to them, "Good people, you that reap, if you do not tell the king that all this corn belongs to the Lord Marquis of Carabas, you shall be chopped as small as herbs for the pot." The king, who passed by a moment after, would know whom all that corn which he then saw belonged to my lord Marquis of Carabas, said the reapers, and the king was very well pleased with it, as well as the Marquis, whom he congratulated thereupon. The master cat, who always went before, said the same words to all that he met, and the king was astonished at the vast estates of my lord Marquis of Carabas. The master cat came at last to a very stately castle, the master of which was an ogre, the richest that ever was known, for all the land that the king had then gone over belonged to this castle. The cat, who had taken care to inform himself who this ogre was, and what he could do, asked to speak with him, saying he would not pass so near his castle without having the honour of paying his respects to him. The ogre received him as civilly as an ogre could do, and made him sit down. "I have been assured," said the cat, "that you have the power of changing yourself into all sorts of creatures that you have a mind to. You can, for example, transform yourself into a lion, an elephant, and the like." "This is true," said the ogre very briskly, "and to convince you, you shall see me now a lion." The cat was very much so frightened to see a lion stand before him that he immediately got up on the gutters, not without a great deal of trouble and danger, because of his boots, which were of no use to him at all in walking upon the tiles. Some time after, when the cat saw that he had taken his natural form, he came down, and owned he had been very much frightened. "I have been moreover informed," said the cat, "but I knew not how to believe it, that you have also the power to take on your shape of the smallest animals, for example, to change yourself into a rat or mouse. But I must own to you, I take this to be impossible." "Impossible," said the ogre. "You shall see that presently," and at the same time changed himself into a mouse that began to run about the floor. The cat no sooner perceived this, but he fell upon him and ate him up. The king, in the meanwhile, who saw as he passed this fine castle of the ogres, had a mind to come into it. The cat, who had heard the noise of the coach running over the drawbridge, ran out and said to the king, "Your Majesty is welcome to this castle of my lord Marquis of Carabas." "What, my lord Marquis?" said the king. "And does this castle also belong to you? There can be nothing finer than this court and all these stately buildings that surround it. Let us go into it, if you please." The Marquis gave his hand to the princess and followed the king, who went up first. They came into a great hall, where they found a magnificent collation, which the ogre had prepared for his friends, who were there that very day to come see him, but dared not enter, knowing the king was there. The king was quite charmed with the good qualities of my lord Marquis of Carabas, as was his daughter, who was fallen extremely in love with him, and seeing the vast estate he possessed, said to him, after having drunk 5 or 6 glasses, "It will be owing to yourself only, my lord Marquis, if you are not my son-in-law." The Marquis, making several low bows, accepted the honour to the king conferred upon him, and married the same day the princess forthwith. The cat became a great lord, and never ran after more mice, but for his diversion. The end.